Hi, I'm Melissa, and this is the Book Break. And today we're speaking with a fantasy author that has a brand new book out, and she's one of my favorite authors, I have to be honest. Her name is Mel Todd, and we're going to talk about her new book. Hi, Mel, how are you?
Hi, Melissa. How are you doing?
Good. So, your newest book that just recently came out is Vengeance. Tell us a little bit more about this book.
So this is technically, I guess, an urban fantasy thriller or suspense novel, depending on how you look at it. I have this huge world called the Turnian universe, where magic has been around since about the 1850s, and it's kind of had this ripple effect throughout reality as to laws that have changed. Well, one of the things that you have are what are called mage hunters, which are sanctioned by the government, and they are a group of people who are specifically tasked with hunting down and killing mages who go off the reservation, technically. I mean, anybody who has been unwilling to follow the laws of that society, these are the people that go and hunt them down.
Yeah, yeah. And this book, it's a standalone, but it's going to be a series. Vengeance is also a follow-up book to your other series, Twisted Luck, even though you don't have to have read it. But tell us a little bit more about Twisted Luck series and what fun things you have in Vengeance for those that have read that series.
Well, so the Twisted Luck series is a completed urban fantasy series. It ended up at 8 books and two and a half novellas. And it follows the life of one girl whose name is Corey Monroe, where she goes from somebody who works in a coffee shop, is not a mage, just wants to get through to get a career, to somebody who has to deal at the end of the world. And Scott Randolph is one of those characters that you miss at the or you meet at the beginning of the first book. He's just kind of a side character. Well, in the later books, he popped back up, and I had always made these random comments about how a movie had been made out of his life. Well, when I started looking at a new series to write in the Turnian universe, which is where Twisted Luck is set, I went, you know what? It might be kind of fun to go back and revisit exactly what he did to have a movie made out of him. So the movie is basically a kind of Die Hard movie, maybe Die Hard crossed with Law and Order. And he had always just rolled his eyes anytime somebody asked that, going, "No, really, they exaggerated. That is not what happened." And so this is the story of his first case and why it became a movie. And if you read the book, you can totally see them doing a Die Hard movie
Oh yeah.
off of his story.
Yeah, you really can. And it's fun because um even so I read the Twisted Luck series and you didn't hear quite as much about, I mean, he was a good strong character in that book, but this is really fun to hear his backstory. And for those that haven't read Twisted Luck, they're still really going to love Vengeance because I mean, this really is urban fantasy, adventure, thriller. I mean, it's all goodness wrapped into one.
I tried hard to make all of the new characters really interesting, at the same time giving you little fun Easter eggs. If you're somebody who has read the series, you're gonna be like, "Oh, that's what they're up to right now." But this particular story takes place about, good grief, I think it's about 30 or 40 years before the start of the Twisted Luck series.
Yeah, yeah. And I like too how it showed a progression of he didn't think he was that great of a mage. He was just kind of thinking he would just go through his residency, so to speak, that they're required to go
Their
through.
draft.
Their draft, that's it. I'm like, it's not residency, but draft. So,
Draft.
and then as he went through some scary experiences, then he learned, hey, he's got a kind of future he wasn't anticipating.
It was. He definitely, I enjoyed the metamorphosis from basically nerdy science guy to
Uh-huh.
somebody who both understood why sometimes death is the only option. And remember, this is an alternate reality. This is
Right.
not our world. If you're a mage, you can honestly just walk by and look at people and kill them. There's no way to keep them in prison. There's no way to rehabilitate them. So that's why there's these really hard rules around mages. And if they start breaking them, well, you kind of decided you're not going to follow the rules of society anymore. And it's not like they can kick them to a desert island or Australia. So in many cases, yeah, death is the ultimate punishment. I set it up a long time ago that if you broke the law, while for somebody who wasn't a mage, it might be 10, 20 years in prison, for you,
Right.
it's death because
Right.
there's no way to control you.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was a really interesting way to handle those kinds of challenges because I've seen in other stories where there are some people that have magic and some people that don't. I always wondered, like, well, what's stopping the bad guys from just killing people, or how are the just regular mortals handling not having any power and even dealing with the anxiety of, hey, if somebody walks by with a tattoo, or, in this case, in Vengeance, they have a tattoo, but in other worlds, maybe they don't. What's stopping them? But I think you handled that really, really well. And it was,
Well,
it was fun.
it was one of the things that I've had people mention. They're like, everybody's super polite in your world. I'm like, yeah, they are. People also very rarely lie because there's an entire subsection of the population who can tell when you're lying. It's when I talk about the fact that they all have tattoos on their right side that tells what type of mage they are. It's the same
Yeah.
equivalent as walking down the street with a six-shooter strapped to your hip. You're going to be relatively politer to the person with a gun on their hip than
Right.
you may be to somebody who just looks like a nerd. These are their guns, and it does
Yeah.
enforce a certain level of social politeness
Mm-hmm.
that you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily see in today's society. And this is a global thing. I think I mentioned a couple of times, there's only like 2 or 3 countries in the world that don't follow the tattoos and
Mm-hmm.
different ways that
Mm-hmm.
they control their mages.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's an interesting, different social dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I always have to ask this question because I am a really big fan of yours. So this is Mage Hunter, but as I understand, there will be more books in the Mage Hunter series, right?
They are gonna come out slowly. It's definitely not gonna be as fast as what I did Twisted Luck, because Twisted Luck had a very definite story arc where it started at one point, and each story had its own little plot, but there was a place I was getting to at the end of that series. This isn't. This is much more along the lines of Law& and Order, where you will have character arcs because people grow and change. Nobody stays exactly the same, but each story is going to be a story within itself. So in theory, you would be able to pick up most of them at any point in the series and just read it as a standalone. Yes, you might miss some of the relationship development. And note, I pretty much never write romances, and my characters don't necessarily go, "Oh, he's so cute," and fall in love. But I
Right.
do write how friendships develop, how
Mm-hmm.
relationships, how your connections with your coworkers, your connections with yourself, how those change and twist over time. So you should be able to pick up any book in this series and just enjoy it as a standalone. You just might
Yeah.
miss out some of the extra flavor if you've
Right.
read the Twisted Luck series plus reading it in order. Now, at some
Yeah.
point, I will write. I kind of end this, a little bit of a spoiler. I kind of end this with him telling you the story of his first case, but you don't find out the actual resolution to the bad guy. And there's a very, very specific reason for this. But this wasn't about him getting the bad guy. This was about him telling you about the movie that was made and what the real
Right.
story behind it was. But
Yeah.
he obviously is gonna have other cases and other things he has to do over the years because he had a career of, like, 20 plus years in this,
Yeah.
basically bounty hunters.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I gotta tell our viewers, I love this book. I love the pretty much, if Mel Todd wrote it, you should read it. Um, well, thank you so much for being here
Oh,
with us
no,
today,
thank
Mel.
you.
And thank you to our viewers. We'll see you next time.